flooding schools. Adrian Rochella, ABC News.
And rainfall is becoming less across the north and east of the country. They've got a high pressure system sitting over the southeast. That's still driving some moist onshore winds along the coast. Some showers embedded in that moist onshore wind flow, but falls are expected to be relatively light. It's not until we hit the far northern tropics where we've still got the active monsoon trop, but it's also starting to weaken, and so any rainfall across those northern areas be getting a little bit lighter. We've got some cold air sweeping up into the southwest corner of the continent, so an easing of the heat through Perth. Unfortunately, this system isn't expected to bring anything in the way of significant rainfall, some showers and storms about, but most totals are expected to be below about 5 to 10 millimetres. Similar story along the coast of Queensland and New South Wales. Any falls should be light, mostly just a millimetre or two with showers. Plenty of sunshine about the southeast, but the monsoon trough still remaining active through the north, so we're expecting to see some further showers and storms there on Friday. But at this point, most of the heavy falls have started to dissipate. Could be isolated heavy falls, but widespread heavy totals aren't expected as we head towards the weekend. Now, another frontal system will move up towards Western Australia, but some easing conditions in between, and that weak front will also start to move in towards the southeast. So cloud on the increase, a few showers developing later, but again, we're not expecting much in the way of rainfall as that system moves through, but what it will do is introduce some very cold air, in fact some snow about the high parts of Tasmania towards the latter part of the weekend. Still some showers along the New South Wales and Queensland coast, but nothing in the way of heavy falls expected. In fact, any showers in Sydney should have cleared. It should be a mostly sunny day, cloudy periods at times, particularly through the morning, and some further falls up across the north, but again, nothing in the way of widespread heavy totals.
Adrenaline junkie Sir Richard Branson is preparing to attempt another world record. The billionaire plans to pilot a submarine to the bottom of the sea, exploring the deepest points in each of the world's 5 oceans. The Virgin Oceanic is the only manned craft in the world capable of going to the bottom of each ocean.
You know, there is just so much to explore, there's so much to discover. You know, we don't know whether we're going to run across a giant octopus that's going to want us for dinner. That's never been discovered before. I mean, just nobody knows. So we're going to obviously come across some absolutely fascinating creatures and learn some fascinating things that hopefully will be useful for mankind.
Branson says he ultimately wants to make the trip available to everyone. I'll be back with an update in a moment, then stay with us for Lateline Business. You're watching ABC News 24.
Water it came quickly.
This is unbelievable. I've never seen so much rain come down in such a short period of time. This is unbelievable.
Well, this is something you don't get to see very often in Afghanistan. That is large numbers of people out in public enjoying themselves, having fun. Last year was the deadliest year of the war so far. There were a record number of military and civilian casualties. Many people across the country are hoping that the new year will bring some much-awaited peace and prosperity.
When the firefighters of this unit were ordered to the Fukushima plant, they didn't hesitate. In fact, most didn't even call their wives or families. Instead, they sent short text messages or emails telling their loved ones where they were going and what they were about to try to do.
News doesn't just happen in the morning, it continues throughout the day.
Dairy farmers have criticised plans by supermarket giants Coles and Woolworths.
So for the latest global, national and current affairs, look no further than Afternoon Live.
Welcome back to Afternoon Live on ABC News 24. Hello, I'm Kim Landers.
Get the afternoon's news now with Afternoon Live. Weekdays from 3 p.m. on ABC News 24.
The
The anti-carbon tax roadshow comes to town.
Old people with grey hair. Just to clarify on the kind of people that were there.
Someone tweeted this afternoon the best way to disperse it was for the Labour Party to start spreading a rumour of midsummer murders.
And forget World Wars.
No, go away. Go and eat your dinner.
Brand is very important, but personally, I don't actually equate VB with anything of particular quality.
The Drum, weeknights on ABC News 24.
The top stories from ABC News. The Defence Minister has revealed the female cadet at the centre of a sex scandal today faced a disciplinary hearing on unrelated charges. Stephen Smith has told the Defence Department to quash today's findings for being absent without leave and drinking. He says today's hearing shouldn't have been held while she was struggling with allegations that another cadet broadcast her having sex on the internet. After days of fighting in Ivory Coast, talks are underway to secure the surrender of Laurent Gbagbo, who's been refusing to give up the presidency since he lost last year's election. As the power struggle draws to a close, Ivory Coast is also facing a humanitarian crisis as thousands try to flee the country. According to the UN, Laurent Gbagbo has expressed his willingness to stand down and is demanding protection. An extra $39 million is being made available to help Queensland flood victims. The money will go to not-for-profit groups and community development offices. It will also pay for the building of memorials and financial planning services. And 1,400 schools in Japan will be monitored for radiation as authorities try to contain the emergency at the Fukushima nuclear plant. The plant's operator has detected radioactive iodine above the legal limit in seawater close to the facility. And those are the latest headlines on ABC.
Walid Mamok is one of Australia's foremost Indigenous artists. He upheld an unbroken tradition of rock painting passed down by his father that stretches back tens of thousands of years. In the Indigenous Quarter, we take a special look back at his life.
It was always encouraging us to remember him, that he was a very special person.
That's throughout this month on ABC News 24.
Good evening and welcome to Lateline Business. I'm Tikki Fullerton. Tonight, left on the shelf, Singapore rebuffed, but the ASX still looking for a long-term, serious relationship.
Just because everybody else in the world is doing it doesn't mean it's right, but it also means you better think about it very carefully.
We look at One's deal with Seven and ask, does it really stack up for One's shareholders?
West Australian newspapers will be paying $4 billion in enterprise value to get hold of Seven Group Holdings. And in return for that, they'll get an extra $200 million per annum after-tax profit. Now that's about a 5% return on investment.
And the boss of Stockland joins calls for more long-term thinking from the politicians.
I think one of the things we're seeing in politics at the moment is becoming a lot more micro rather than big picture, and it's time for a big bold vision about what this country stands for, what we want it to be looking like and how we're going to get there.
To the markets where no clear lead by the gold and Brent crude price left the market drifting along. The All Ords crossed the 5,000 mark, the ASX 200 added 13 points. In Japan, the Nikkei slipped a little, while Hong Kong's Hang Seng was up. Well, the critics came out swinging today as the government all but killed off the planned $7 billion takeover of the Australian Securities Exchange by its Singaporean counterpart. Chief amongst the critics was ANZ boss Mike Smith, who saw it as creeping protectionism, which could discourage foreign investors. Others called for an explanation as to why the deal was against the national interest. Here's Philip Lasker.
They're refurbishing the Stock Exchange Gallery in Sydney, but the changes are likely to be just cosmetic. The Foreign Investment Review Board has blocked a more significant refurbishment, a takeover by the Singapore Stock Exchange.
It was a unanimous advice of all FIRB members that the takeover would not be in the national interest. So the parties yesterday were informed that they intended to take that decision and given an opportunity to respond.
Shadow Treasurer Joe Hockey was careful not to criticise the decision itself.
If Wayne Swan has a view about the national interest, he should explain
the reasons for his decision. He should explain to the Australian people, he should explain to investors why he has taken this preliminary decision.
And it triggered a response from a former treasurer who noted the trend to stock exchange mergers around the world.
Just because everybody else in the world is doing it doesn't mean it's right, but it also means you better think about it very carefully.
That's just what Wayne Swan says he's done, but it didn't prevent the obvious questions about the negative signal it sends to foreign investors.
It's very important to understand that we take this process very seriously. Australia welcomes foreign investment.
But that's not the way some of Australia's top executives saw it.
Well, it's hard to understand how such a deal could have been against the national interest, but then again, I'm not privy to the information that the Treasurer had. Having said that, I think that this is another case of increasing protectionism we're seeing throughout the world.
Small investors who supported a merger were worried about a structure that resulted in Singaporean ownership of Australia's market regulator.
And the fact that we were looking at a foreign company taking over that site, there were always going to be issues in how this was going to be managed.
Yes, sure, at a business level there is a merger taking place, but not at a regulatory level.
And Professor Frino says this may be the Australian Stock Exchange's best and last chance.
The message that we send to the marketplace that we're unwilling to do a deal which brings in international capital in this form may turn off other potential suitors.
Not everyone says the deal is definitely dead, and some investors were still happy to buy ASX shares. They closed slightly higher.
West Australian Newspapers is facing a big backlash from small investors next week when they vote on the deal, which will transform their company into one of the biggest media players in the country and also load it up with debt. The proposal by Kerry Stokes for One to buy his Seven Media Group is a controversial one which has split the investing community, with only 14% of the shares on offer for retail shareholders being snapped up. Andrew Robertson investigates.
After 6 weeks to digest Kerry Stokes' latest corporate engineering, enthusiasm in the investing community is still in short supply.
It's essentially a financial reconstruction of the two assets that are largely owned already by interests associated with Kerry Stokes. There aren't a great many direct operational benefits for either company.
The $4 billion deal will combine Western Australia's dominant state-based media company with the Seven television network, Pacific Magazines and the online portal Yahoo 7. At the moment, Seven Media Group is owned by the Kerry Stokes-controlled Seven Group Holdings, private equity firm Kohlberg Kravis Roberts and a number of smaller investors. To pay for Seven Media Group, West Australian Newspapers will issue new shares which will include a public offer, and it will take on $1.7 billion of Seven's debt. It's that debt which BBY's Mark McDonald believes is a key reason why less than 20% of WAN's small investors have taken up their entitlement in the public offer so far.
Well, retail shareholders are probably attracted in the main to the very strong dividend flow that historically WAN has provided. Its capacity to do so in the future, if this deal goes ahead, is likely to be much less.
Even supporters of the WAN-7 merger, such as media strategist Steve Allen, have concerns.
West Australian Newspapers moves out of being really a mono-media organisation and a much more broadly based organisation, therefore much less risk over the various advertising cycles, but it's taken on a lot of debt to do it.
Many big shareholders clearly have their worries too. West Australian Newspapers' share price has fallen 16% since the Seven purchase was announced on the 21st of February. Seven Group Holdings, which is regarded as getting by far the better of the deal, has also lost ground. For Brisbane-based fund manager Tim Saville-Innes, the reason is simple. In his view, it's an ugly deal, particularly for West Australian newspapers.
West Australian Newspapers will be paying $4 billion in enterprise value to get hold of Seven Group Holdings. And in return for that, they'll get an extra $200 million per annum after-tax profit. Now that's about a 5% return on investment.
Tim Savalins also questions the business case for the deal, noting that the internet will provide only 2% of the merged company's revenue.
Essentially, they're turning a very good media company that has a good position in the West into a very large media and print company, which is in competitive spaces because you've got the likes of Channel 7 and Channel 10 and the ABC and the SBS, as well as all the other print competitors they have.
Channel 7 is currently the most watched free-to-air network, which Mark McDonald believes in terms of this takeover is a worry for WAN shareholders because the valuation of 7 has been prepared on current earnings.
7 is doing exceptionally well. Its revenue share is greater than its rating share. So it's been able to monetize its commercial success as a competing television network to a degree that is somewhat unusual and I think many might think not sustainable over the long term.
However, for all the perceived faults of Kerry Stokes' latest corporate manoeuvring, Fusion Strategies' Steve Allen makes this point.
And he's a very canny investor. So really, if you invest by wanting to run the shirt tails of a very canny investor, you'd be doing very well.
We'll know next Monday if investors in West Australian newspapers share that view.
Rio Tinto has secured the largest stake of Riversdale Mining in its $3.9 billion takeover bid. This evening, Rio Tinto said it had an interest in 49.49% of all the shares of the South African miner, well above its 47% target. The miner struggled to obtain the final shares, last week raising its original bid to an unconditional cash offer of $16.50 a share. With Rio Tinto's target met, the $16.50 price will be paid and has been automatically extended for 14 days as a result of the offer price increase. The rest of what's been happening on the local share market now. Earlier I spoke to Martin Lakos from Macquarie Private Wealth. Well, Martin Lakos, we have gold and Brent crude prices jumping ahead. What's this done for the local share market?
Yes, we had an interesting day. Still a bit like Groundhog Day from yesterday. Small trading range, but still very good trading volumes. Today we had a 21-point range on volumes of just under $6 billion. So there's plenty of activity taking place, just not so much volatility. Now overnight we had virtually no lead out of the US or UK or European for that matter. Stock markets, they basically closed up or down, low digit numbers. But as you mentioned, gold was up another $20 an ounce. I suspect it was more on the back of commentary from Federal Reserve Bernanke's commentary that they're watching inflation very closely. And there's certainly some fears out there in the marketplace that this